All right, guys, for this live code walkthrough, we're going to walk through how to do a Magic 8-Ball program. So a Magic 8-Ball, basically you ask it a yes or no question, you shake it, and then you flip it over, and it's going to have a set of random responses in there that it's going to display, okay, like ask again later, all, directions point to yes, most definitely, something like that. So we are going to design that in code, which means we need a couple things. We need to be able to have some type of list of responses, canned responses that we can go through. We need to be able to randomly pick from one of those. We also need to be able to have the user be able to program in what their question is. Now, for the sake of this, the Magic 8-Ball does not care what the answer is. It just needs to be the option that we can do it. So we're going to implement a couple things, a button, a text input, we need to implement the list, and we need a random response. Okay, so to start off, we're going to need to have a couple things. We know that we're going to have a list of responses, which I will be talking about. We're going to need to have a button. We're going to need to have some type of text input. I'm going to call it text input. And then we're going to need to have our current response. Okay, now a couple things that we're going to need to have. Let's do our current response. Current response ultimately is going to be, we could ask something like, ask me a question, and I will provide the answer. Okay, so there is my current response. In my draw, I want to display that. So I'm going to just do a text, and I can display that current response. I want to give it a position. So let's say that I want to position it at 50 and roughly in the middle of the screen. And I want to control the size of it so that it will flow to the next page. There we go. Maybe I might want to change the text size or the stroke. Let's do larger text size, 24. There we go. That looks pretty good. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do, we need to implement the responses. And responses is a list, okay? The easiest list that we can do is an array, all right? Now, this is how we would initialize an array. So we're initializing an empty array. Now we could end up individually putting in responses in here, like hi, yes, and that would create the array. The way that I want you guys to do it, though, is to start getting used to creating the array and putting items in on the fly, which we would do it like this, responses.push, and then we can type in what we want. This is useful because if we want to add stuff later on, we could build that in easy enough. Okay, so we want to do, right now I'm just going to do a yes, no, a couple yes responses, no responses, and a maybe response, or something to that. So most definitely, there's my yes response. Let's do a responses.push, ask me later. There's my maybe. Responses.push, are you kidding? Okay, so obviously we could have a lot more responses, but we have, basic yes, no, and a maybe. Usually good is to have 3 yes, 1 maybe, and 3 no's. Okay, now that is my responses. I put them in this list. Now I want to randomly do one of the list. Now if I am doing, say, ultimately I want to put this as a button, but I want to say current response is going to be a random one of the responses. Then every time I'm running, now this is going to happen very fast, but it's going through all of the different options, okay? So ultimately we want to do this, but we want to do this only at certain times, okay? Which means that we want to do this in a button. So let's look at the references, and I'm going to quickly point out the random. So random. Here is different ways that we can do random. We can, looking at the syntax, could do 0, 1, or 2 arguments. We can have nothing and it's going to go from 0 to 1. We can have 1 and it's going to go up to that number but not include that number. Or we can do random with a list and it will randomly pick from that list, like what we see here. We can pass in a list, an array, and it's going to randomly pick one from there. Okay? All right, so that is how we can do a random list of that, what I just shown. Now, other things that we need is we need the button. So this would be a button in text input. That would be a document object model element, which is under the DOM. So I can see all of these. So yep, you guessed it. Create button is what I would use to create a button. Now, when we create a button, there's multiple things that we can do. We can create a button, give it a name. We can give a specific position of where we want it to be. And we can also link it to a custom function to do things when I click on the button. So that's what we're going to use. We're going to use this as a template to build the button. All right, so we have the button right here. Now we're going to create the button. btn equals create button. And I'm going to put in here, ask me. All right, now we are going to position it. We're going to position this a little bit later, but we do want to link it up with some type of custom function. And we can say button pressed. Or how about generate random, how about generate response? All right, so generate response, that's what we need to build as our function. So I'm going to go all the way down below my draw, and we're going to create a custom function that's called this. Does not need a requirement. And basically what we're going to do is we're going to do this piece of code right here. We're going to generate a current response when we press the button. So now seeing that work, there is the button when I press it. Now I'm generating a different response every time I push the button. Okay, so that's working. Now let's do a text input. So we'll go back to the DOM. Where am I at? There it is. The next one would be a create input right here. This is for a text input. That's what it looks like. And we can actually get the value of it. So we're going to build this in. So that's our text input. Since we're going to position based off of it, we're going to do it. Actually, we're going to position the button using the text input. So we're going to say create input. I don't need to put anything in there. And now it's there. So there's my text input. But now I want to actually position it. So t input dot position, and I want to position it underneath, above the question, but in line. So this is at 50. So we're going to say 50, comma, let's do, I don't know, height divided by 2 minus 100. See what that looks like. There it is. Maybe I want it a little bit less. Okay. So now that I positioned it, I can actually position the button also, and I can keep it linked to the text input. And to do that, I can use built-in variables that the text input has. The text input has an x, and it has a width, and a height, and a y. So I can say tinput.x plus the width of the input. That's where I want my x. So now if I run this, my button is switched so it's lining up with the edge right there. Now I can do the y, which is going to be the same as whatever the y is for my text input. So now when I run this, it's linked up. Now this only works because the text input was positioned before the button. All right, so now that I have that, when I type something and ask, it's still showing this, so I want to be able to remove that. So that is where I can actually look at the dot value. The dot value is something that we can pull what it currently has or what I want into it. So I can say tinput dot value, and then I could put, say, an empty set of quotes, and watch what happens. So now we write it, and then we can ask, and see it's removed it, so we're ready to ask the next question. So this is basically the Magic 8-Ball. It's live code. All right, you guys can follow along and do this. You're probably going to be using arrays and different types of inputs on future projects. All right, good luck. Have fun.